Hey guys, one of the most common issues that you'll run into with strength training is issues with the knee, especially because we're doing a lot more squats and lunges and leg presses and stuff that you've probably ever done before. Uh, every once in a while, you might be in the midst of a training session and all of a sudden you feel a little bit of pain. Maybe you're coming into vigor training with some pre-existing knee pain. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can do to minimize or reduce or eliminate any pain in the knee. One, if you're coming into vigor with pre-existing knee pain. Two, if every once in a while you're in the middle of a training session and something hits you, like I know Matt had mentioned this happened to him last week when I'm recording this video, happened to him last week. So I'm going to give you a few tips in terms of your technique that you can apply every training session to potentially reduce or eliminate any knee pain that you have or prevent it from happening. So first thing, of course, if you're carrying a lot of extra weight, you need to get rid of the weight. Our bodies aren't made to handle, or our joints aren't made to handle carrying an extra 50 or 100, 150 pounds. So that by itself is no, even if you're using good technique and as you have good posture and you're getting in a lot of walking, you're going to get some irritation in the knees if you're carrying too much extra weight. So that's the first thing. But I'm going to focus mainly on, okay, let's assume that you're on the path toward getting to a healthier weight, or perhaps you are at a great body weight already, and you're doing some stuff, maybe you're squatting in some ways where it might be creating some pain. So I'm doing this in a little small group fitness studio at one of the gyms that I work out at, only because this way I'm away from everyone else. I can talk freely. I figured this video would take 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes to go through everything I want to talk about. So I don't have a rack. I'm going to just basically use the bar here that I brought in and rack it myself. But before I do that, what I want to mention is if I was doing this in the rack, it doesn't matter if you're using an empty bar or you're doing a max squat. Every time that you're doing a warm-up set, every time that you get ready to lift the bar off the rack, you want to take the same position as though there's a max weight on there. And part of that is if we do our warm-up sets in a real casual way and we're not real focused on maintaining good posture and using good technique, we create a habit of poor technique that can carry over into the heavier stuff. So I want to say, again, when you walk up to the bar, an empty bar to do a first set of warm-ups, or maybe you're just doing 135 and you're warming up to 200 or 300 pounds, every set counts in terms of using proper technique. All right. So with that said, a couple things in terms of racking the bar or getting the bar on your shoulders itself. So the first thing first potential cause of knee pain for a lot of people is that they consistently rack the bar too high on their shoulders. So for most people, a low bar squat is what it's called, is where you're setting the bar down, further down on your traps. The more muscle you have on your traps, the more comfortable that's going to be. But for a reference point, it's really where your scapula kind of stick out. Like right now, I'm rolling over the bony part of my scapula in my back. Up here, it's sitting more on my neck. The reason for this is if you look from the side, you can see in this position, the bar is further forward. When I bring the bar down, it's actually sitting further behind me, and that's going to make it easier to move back with the hips instead of dropping straight down. The problem is to maintain a center of balance when the bar is up high, people will tend to drop at the knees first. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you start the squat with the knees, you're going to put a lot more stress in the knee and increase the chance that you're going to cause knee pain. So first thing, set the bar low on the traps. Then from there, one of the things that I do on every set, whether it's a warm-up or a working set, once I get my feet placed, is I actually squeeze my glutes together and push my hips forward I'm gonna take this off for a second. Even though my feet are staying still, what that does when I squeeze my glutes and push my hips forward is it actually slightly rotates my femur out, and that engages more of the whole quad and of course the glutes themselves as well. So because of that, when I start, again, if I'm doing just a standard stance, first thing I'll do, squeeze the glutes together, push my hips forward. Right now my glutes are on fire because I'm squeezing them. And then as I sit back into the squat, I've already got the glutes engaged. If you don't consciously, intentionally uh, focus on using your glutes, like I can squat for the most part without engaging much of my glutes at all if I'm not intentional about it. And when I do that, it puts a lot more stress in my back, puts a lot more stress in the knee. The quads are basically doing all of the work. So once you get the bar set low on your traps, you're gonna push your hips forward, squeeze your glutes so that your thighs kind of rotate out, and then begin your set of squats. The other thing in terms of starting, and again, I kind of mentioned this already, think about moving your hips back to start the squat instead of dropping forward. If you talk to the average person, they'll often say your knees should be tracking with your feet. And it's a good thing to think about. Hips, knees, feet should all be in alignment. But I can do that. I can have my knees track with my feet and still use mainly my quads by dropping down at the knees first. And what you'll notice, if you start with the knees too, is it's almost impossible to get into a deep squat without falling on your butt. If you start with the hips first, it's a lot easier to get into a deeper squat position. So 1, bar lower on the back. 2, squeeze your glutes, push your hips forward, almost to the point where you might even feel a pop in your hips. I feel that probably every other time that I do it. And then 3, start by moving the hips back instead of letting the knees drop down. Okay. A couple other things. 1, the width of your feet. So as you go wider and wider, unless you're a football players, I'll normally have them keep their feet pointing straight ahead even as they go wider. But in terms of just strength, mobility, and lean body mass, the stuff that we're focused on here with VIGOR Training, as you go wider, your toes are going to go out, and that allows you to keep your hip, knee, and toes in alignment. But it's the same thing. The wider that you're going to go, you still have to start by pushing the hips back and dropping down as opposed to going forward with the feet. You'll actually notice that you're doing it more with a wider stance. So if you tend to start with your knees or start by dropping your knees down instead of your hips back, it's going to be a lot more obvious, and you're not going to be able to get very low at all. Like, this is the end of the range of motion. But when I push my hips back, I can get down into a full squat. The last thing is, as you're squatting, again, we talked about starting by squeezing your glutes and actually feeling like you're almost turning your thighs out. That's externally rotating your thighs, even though your feet are staying still. You're engaging all of the muscles around your glutes and all of your quads. As you squat, think about pushing your legs apart and pushing back up again. Some people will even put a band around their knees so that they're consciously pushing their knees out. And what you're doing by either thinking about it or even using bands as you're squatting is you're keeping those glutes engaged. If your knees fall in, if your knees cave in either on the way down or you're pushing on the way back up, this is a clear sign you're not engaging your glutes enough, and it is going to lead to some knee irritation or knee pain. So just to recap, bar lower on your shoulders, you're having some knee issues, start by squeezing the glutes, turning your thighs out, or thinking about turning your thighs out and pushing your hips forward before you take them back and down. Feet in alignment, or toes in alignment with your knees and your hips, and the wider that you need to go, the more you're going to turn your toes out. Think about pushing out, either using a band or just imagining that you're pushing your knees or your feet apart as you're squatting. And the last thing, and I mentioned this to Matt as well, we have these other muscles that we don't talk about too much unless we're using the adductor machine. These are our adductor muscles, and you'll notice in big squatters, these are huge. Your adductor muscles are an important part of squatting as well. What you'll notice is the wider that you go, the more you're going to engage your adductors in there as well. But one thing that I found really helpful if you're having any kind of hip, knee, or back issues when you're squatting is to do a few sets of the adductor machine. Yeah, it's the the girly machine. It's the movement where you're working against resistance to bring your knees together. The abductor is the one where you're pushing them apart. So pads are on the inside, and you're doing this kind of a movement that gets the adductors fired up. And if you've got active adductors and active glutes, chances are you're not going to deal with any kind of knee pain. So while I do like using supplements or topical stuff to try to alleviate some knee pain, I always look at it like if you're feeling knee pain, there's either something structural, functional, or a technique issue that needs to be addressed. So go ahead and use supplements or like a topical menthol or something like that to reduce the feeling of the pain, but attack it head on. And with some of these tweaks, I would bet that anybody that's having some knee issues or back or hip issues when you're squatting, one of these things that we talked about today will hopefully help solve that. If you have questions, of course, leave those in the comments, and I'm always happy to do another video tutorial to add some other tips or tricks that you guys might find helpful. That's it for today.